things I hope we can talk about is courage. Because for me, in some ways, there's the courage for the betas to stand up to the alphas. There's the courage to face the um, facts of your life if they're worsening and you've got to deal with things you didn't want. You got to see it clearly. One thing that's been here for us is the courage also to recognize when you're kind of facing a binary choice. You've got two paths. This path, you live. That path, everything else. So you have to go this path, and that's the path that really matters to you.
This is Lynn Fraser with the Kiloby Center for Recovery, and I'm really delighted to have my second opportunity to meet with Rick Hanson. And I'm not going to say a lot about you in terms of an introduction because I'd like you to kind of bring in the relevant pieces. But you're a prominent neuropsychologist, really works a lot with the brain, Buddha's Brain, Hardwiring Happiness, a whole bunch of wonderful books, and some new courses that I'd love for you to talk about, Neurodharma in particular. So welcome back. And, I have to say your interview that I did in 2017 is one of the most popular ones. And in particular, people keep telling me about planting flowers. So hopefully we can get to that a little bit today too, a bit of a refresher on neuroscience and some of the issues that, it's so difficult for people right now.
Yeah.
And some of the ways people can work with their nervous systems. So over to you. What would you like to start with?
Well, it's exciting topics. Well, one place I'd like to start is with the power that we actually have to actively influence the brain change process from the inside out for our own benefit and that of other beings. And at a time when a lot of people feel very pushed around by macro, large scale forces, just before we began, as you know, we were talking about the recent California wildfires and the power outages that were necessary to reduce the risk of even more terrible fires. And whether it's external circumstances in society, politics, global climate change, or the neighbor's dog barking all night long next door who will not deal with their dog, right? Nice dog, but what can we do so it doesn't bark all night long? It's great to know in the face of all these external forces that people feel helpless about, including physical health conditions or even the legacy of their traumatic experiences and the long shadow it casts today. It's great to know that there are things you can do inside your own mind that will influence your body, notably its nervous system and the headquarters of the brain, every day, so that gradually, authentically, you can hardwire resources into yourself like grit, gratitude, compassion, and happiness altogether, which is an important psychological resource. So that's where I want to start, that we have that power. No one can defeat us, and no one can do it for us. We are responsible for what we do inside our own minds to influence our own process of growth for the better. And that's incredibly helpful for me. Maybe I'll just drop in one more little point here too, which is that I find that it's easy to trivialize what we're talking about here as some kind of California new age for vacation for rich yuppie jerks to do. Was actually this process where you began of planting flowers. In other words, of growing strengths inside of various kinds, in addition to pulling weeds inside the mind, including abandoning addictions and unwholesome desires, and also practicing with the mind by simply witnessing it, mindful, spacious awareness, which is the foundation practice. But this process of growing flowers can be sort of understood as that's what you do on vacation, or that's what you do when everything's working, or that's so selfish. Actually, this process of growing flowers inside is about growing strengths, determination, commitment to your sobriety, commitment to other people, the courage to stand up to social injustice, let's say. These are things we grow inside. Along the way, we grow things like happiness and contentment and inner peace. And these are wonderful things to grow as well for their own sake and also because they help us become more resilient. But a lot of what inspires my interest here is a very tough-minded recognition of the need to build strengths inside for the long haul of life, as well as to fill ourselves up so we have more to offer to others.
So when someone is in an active addiction, by definition, they're overwhelmed and feeling powerless. And how do people start?
Yeah,
Like, I love your approach of, just one thing or just
yeah.
focusing in on the good. So what would you say to someone who's feeling kind of desperate right now?
Well, I say first and foremost, we always need to start where we are. And I've been reflecting lately on three fundamental forms of courage: the courage to be yourself, the courage to tell the truth, and the courage to love. And we begin with the courage to be ourselves, to name the pain, to name the force of the desire, to accept ourselves fully, to have compassion for ourselves, to the courage to be ourselves. So that's always, to me, where we have to start. And um, and then beyond that, I'm a longtime psychologist, so I am a practical person. I'm a methods guy. I love research. I read a ton of it. I produce just a teeny weeny bit. Mostly, I just read it and apply it and synthesize it. Because the bottom line question is the bottom line, right? How do you help yourself? Just exactly right. So, as a practical person, what a person can do after they have the courage to be themselves and just sort of, where does it hurt? What's it like to be me? What's actually happening? Then, what's useful is to identify and then grow the psychological resources that are matched to the issue. So let's say that someone drinks because they're lonely at bottom. Well, what resources would be matched to that sense of loneliness? Those resources will tend to be social. They have to do with our one of three major needs for connection. So, moments of feeling just casually friendly with other people and internalizing these experiences. That's the material I've talked about how do you actually grow change inside yourself. You have to experience what you want to grow, and then you have to internalize it. Otherwise, it's a nice passing experience, but you don't retain any value. There's no change from state to trait. So we want to develop traits. So let's say you want to develop the trait of feeling friendly with others, feeling connected with others, feeling valued by others, and feeling compassionate and kind and beneficial yourself. Well, these are experiences you could have, and then as you have them authentically, usually mild for lasting a breath or two or three, no big deal. But still, drop by drop, just one thing at a time, you gradually would grow an inner resource that would be matched to the particular, key source of the active addiction. If a different, I'll just give you a different example. If Let's suppose that a person has, a sense of just loss. Their life feels empty and barren, and the one time they have fun is when they get hammered with their friends. Okay, so that's a different kind of issue. I mean, feeling cared about by others might kind of sort of address that, but it's not directly matched. So there, I would say, well, how could you build up more of a sense of gratitude, of thankfulness? How could you really register wholesome pleasures of various kinds? So the flowers that you're growing in your inner garden crowd out the weeds, right? It's hard sometimes to pull weeds, but we can always plant flowers and we can crowd out those weeds over time. So there, in that particular case, I would look for resources that are more matched to a sense of my life isn't fun, my life doesn't have pleasure, it's not stimulating enough. And I would look for alternative supplies that would match that particular shortage or deficit or lack. The word want comes from lack. What's the want? That's unfulfilled there. And then over time, address that as well. There are other things people can do, obviously, growing a recognition of the cost to you of these behaviors. In the moment, um, the bright, shiny object of whatever the addictive process is just seems so compelling. And it's important to realize that, yeah, it will feel good, you know, or the pain, it will anesthetize the pain, and there will be a cost. And to make that cost real, to have a sense of the being you will be tomorrow if you wake up in the morning and have to live through that day, what do you want to give that person? And then over time we develop will, we develop commitment, we develop conviction. These are resources as well that we can grow.
So if someone's facing that choice, there's the drink, and I don't want to do that. So
Yeah.
what could they do in that moment to kind of move into that? Okay, that is going to be the cost because there's so much denial about the cost.
Yeah. So, in addition to the sort of standard obvious things like don't have the drink there in the first place, um, I think there's a apparently Chinese proverb, although I have no idea if it actually came from China. Uh, Person takes drink, drink takes drink, drink takes person.
Ah,
So you're talking about that transition from person takes drink to drink takes drink to then drink takes person. So I'll give you a couple of brain hacks that are really neat based on recent research. So when we're caught up in an addictive moment, and I can relate to this. My grandfather was an alcoholic.
mhm.
I grew, I came of age in the 60s and 70s. And I can relate to it. So the nature of addictive desire is that your world starts to collapse. Your perceptual field starts to collapse around the stimulus object, the drink, okay, or the bottle. You pour another one, right? You order another one. Okay, there you are. So there tends to be a focus on it perceptually, and you start thinking about it. There's a sense of compulsion. There's a term in psychology, it has to do with Rorschach testing and other things. It's called stimulus bound. You get bound to the stimulus, and it feels like that. The Buddha had a metaphor a long time ago of a dog chained to a stake. I know you recently got a puppy, and I doubt your puppy's ever chained to a stake. But anyway, nice human, right? But
Yeah.
anyway, there you are chained to the stake, and you have a little freedom of movement, but you're bound by that stake. Right? It's like that. We're bound to this stake. Okay. When that happens, when we're fixated on a particular target, certain neural circuits in the brain that are then connected with anticipatory reward. So we think it'll be so great if we just do that thing. And so we want it. Those tend to involved with the midline of the cortex up top, with an attentional system also toward the upper part of the brain that's targeted on the stimulus, and then feeding back and forth between reward centers deep in the basal ganglia, more ancient 200, 300 million year old part of the brain. It's very primal, very primordial. Get the carrot, get the cookie, get the drink. You right? Okay, so here's the brain hack. It's very cool. On the other hand, when people are dropped into mindful awareness, just being in the present as it is, so much of that get the drink is about the future as well, right? It's about if I do this thing, I'll have a good future. I'll feel better. I'll like it. It'll be fun. It'll be okay just this once. It'll be a good future. So we're future focused. On the other hand, when we're dropped in the moment, feeling whole, not caught up in the future, with a sense of spaciousness. So over here is this siren song, like Circe and Ulysses. Come here, sailors, come here. It'll be nice. Don't notice those pigs in the corner. It'll be fun. You'll like it on my island. See all these beautiful dancing girls? See all these feasts? Come, come. But if you're mindfully aware, that siren song from Circe is contained in a vast sea of awareness rather than you're glued to it and she's singing in your ear. So, what's happening in your brain when you're doing that is really interesting. Midline activity decreases. You have a sense, networks on the side of the brain, especially the right hemisphere of the brain for right handed people, get more active. And in your attentional systems, a more ancient attentional system starts getting engaged that brings you right into the present moment with its continual updating of consciousness. So, and you're less compelled. When you're in that state of being, you're much less compelled by the drink. So, you can train in these ways of being that stimulate the lateral networks and the lower attentional system. You can train in it through having a mindfulness practice. So you're growing the flower in general before you go to the bar. In other words, off stage, off the playing field, you develop resources, muscles, so that when you're in that situation and you know the siren song is singing to you, you're more resourced. In the moment, what you can also do is draw on whatever you've grown to move more into spacious mindfulness. And some really cool ways to do this, totally separate from having a meditation practice, are be aware of your body as a whole. Get a sense of breathing on the left side of your torso, the right side of your torso, left and right together. Front, back, front and back together. And then by extension, getting a sense of your whole body. As soon as you go into something as a whole, this linear, one part after another, fixation on parts kind of processing that's associated with the midline fades, and you're into holistic gestalt processing, which these lateral networks are involved with, also centered in the right hemisphere because it does holistic gestalt visual spatial processing. So get a sense of your body as a whole naturally. People can just try it. It's great. It's a trick. It's a great trick. Just get a sense of your body as a whole. You can even bring in other things like there I am. I'm aware of my body as a whole. I'm aware of sounds as a whole. You're creating much more spaciousness. There's a traditional metaphor. If you take a spoonful of salt, dump it into a cup of water, let's say, stir it around and drink the whole thing, it tastes terrible. But if you take the same amount of salt, the same amount of addiction, and you put it in a big bucket of clean water, and then you take a cup out and drink it, you hardly taste the salt. So when you go into the sense of things as a whole, you're creating much vast spaciousness in which the compulsion is still flashing. It might be as loud as ever, but it's small now in comparison to everything else. And when you go into the sense of your body as a whole, it brings you right into the present. So you're not anticipating the future. You're not caught up in the inner advertising agency that's lying to you about how great it'll be if you do it. Blah, 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 blah. That's a great hack. And then a related one. And these neural circuits kind of work together. I'll be fast on this one. In addition to a sense of your body as a whole, you can get a sense of the physical space as a whole, like the whole volume of the room you're in. And more generally, let your gaze move out to the horizon. When we're addicted, everything is close. Everything's immediate. My precious, I want that now. It's so close. But, and that tends to engage circuitry in the brain that's called egocentric processing. Me. And that's, again, the nature of addiction. How great it'll be for me. How bad I feel. I, me, myself, I, me, myself, I. Not a thought about consequences for others, not a thought about the other who will be myself tomorrow morning. So when we're, that sense of me, myself, and I is very involved here in the midline. Also, when we think of things locally, close to us, me, myself, and I. But if you move your gaze to the horizon, or up to the heavens, which is why so many spiritual experiences happen in nature, or looking up to the heavens, when you just look out, it reduces egocentric neural processing and it increases what's called allocentric neural processing, which tracks things as a whole, including in the present moment. So that's maybe a long way of explaining some things that people can actually do that are grounded in brain science in the moment so that they're less compelled by this addictive desire.
That's amazing. And one of the things that people often do is shame themselves for, you're so weak, you're an idiot, all of these things. And so we're kind of, even if we're thinking about you're going to wake up tomorrow feeling so horrible, and you're doing exactly the opposite. You're going, let's get into wholeness.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right.
It's the shame that drives the addictive behavior so often. And when we shame ourselves, it's harder.
Very insightful. I know it's like arguing with that, your crazy, politically crazy uncle at dinner, and like, there's no benefit. You're like stuck in the quarrel. The trick is to just step out of the whole quarrel and just kind of see it in this vast, spacious, compassionate way.
So when you're talking about matching the tools to the strength, so somebody has a loneliness that's around not being able to say the truth of who I am. So we might have connections with people, but they're not really based on authenticity. So what would you suggest around that?
It's a deep thing. So I would suggest this is a classic issue. So I'm going to tap into the wisdom of many people, probably including you as well. Uh, First, it's helpful to understand it, that we are operating on the basis of an act or persona. And by the way, one of the most, I'm trained as a PhD psychologist, blah, blah. So I sat through a lot of classes and all the rest of that, learned all these models. Maybe the simplest model of the being, the psyche, in the broadest sense, the self, that I've come across is the simplest. It's three circles. The outer circle is called the act. It's who we want the world to think we are, who we want to think we are. It's our presentation. Now, there's a place for a little bit of an act. We adapt from situation to situation, or in certain circumstances, it's not useful to reveal our soft underbelly. It would be unwise. Okay. But for many of us, and definitely for myself in younger years, that act is like walking around in a suit of armor that's three sizes too small. It's the false self. Okay, there's the act. Second circle inside that outer circle is called the scared self. It's basically who we are afraid we are and who we don't want the world to see that we are. And in the territory of the scared self is all the things we've pushed down, including many authentic feelings that are vulnerable: sorrow, shame, loss, fear, longings, really sweet, often childlike, unfulfilled longings that kind of lives there in the scared self. And then the third circle, the center of it all, is the innermost being, who we really are. And so the process of growth, a lot, is to gradually replace an act that worked back then, because we grow these acts because they work, right? They're a way of coping. Is to gradually replace that act that we developed back then with a more effective and functional way of managing issues, including conflicts with other people, while at the same time making our presentation to the world much more porous, so that what is genuinely there can be more apparent to others beneath the surface and can be expressed or included. It's not the whole of who we are in the moment, but it can be included. And as I say to people, can you feel it while you say it? A lot of people report on their interior like a correspondent, a war correspondent from across the world reporting on a distant battle. It's very rational and Spock-like, but it doesn't feel very real. And can you feel it while you say it? That's where you're in authentic communication. So, and then related to that process, to trust the innermost being. Natural. That's a big thing, I think, is that people say, I don't trust. Well, I understand the part about not trusting a world that's unreliable, or people that are unreliable, and being clear-eyed and healthy disenchantment. On the other hand, a lot of that boils down to not trusting yourself. You don't trust yourself to be good, or to be strong, or to be able to deal or get through it, or to get through the night without using in one way or another. You don't trust yourself to be able to do that. And so it really is helpful to repeatedly be aware of the natural goodness, wakefulness, lovingness, wisdom deep down inside, the better angels of our nature. And so more and more what happens in this natural process that takes time is we replace a problematic act with a much more effective, loose one. We gradually clear out the scared self material from the past, and we become more comfortable with it. And more we just live from our being. More and more we just be ourselves. We be ourselves out loud in an ongoing, courageous kind of way. So that's the overall process. And I think it's helpful for people to just go, okay, it's a process. It took a lot of crud to get me here. It's going to take time and effort and steps to get me out of here, but at least I'm going to try. And so that's one. Second is to really feel that you have inner allies. This is so important. Where we develop these acts, and as you brought up, we feel lonely partly because we don't have authentic connections with others, because we feel let down by others, because we were let down by others, or we were mistreated by others. It's not just the absence of the good, but the presence of the bad, or not just the presence of the bad and also the absence of the good. Both those can really affect us. So today, I'm a huge believer, in the sense of practical. I've seen it. Like I believe in watering plants. I just see it, right? I believe in inhaling. I believe in inhaling. In much the same way, I believe in inhaling social supplies. So good, like right there, boom. I saw your face, you're warm, you're caring, you're present, clear eyed. That's an opportunity for half a breath to register a sense of being with someone who's wise and caring and sees me, for example. So even people in who live in isolation or difficult circumstances, there are dozens of opportunities in the lives of almost everyone, unless you're in the world's worst prison or you're living in a cave in the middle of nowhere. And even then, you can bring into your imagination the sense of receiving from others, and very important, the sense of giving to others. There are limitations on what we can receive from others. And it's understandable that we focus on what we can receive from others if we haven't received enough. In other words, to focus on looking for that opportunity. I say the hot dog vendor, where you just joke, or you feel seen, or there's a genuine look of presence and warmth from a stranger passing on the street as you go on by. Or you have a sense of camaraderie with people you work with, or maybe in terms of the world, you feel like you're in common cause with people who care about our planet, or who are fellow Christians, or whatever it might be, or fellow people in recovery, a sense of camaraderie and community there. There's so many opportunities to have usually mild and relatively brief and still real, but little bites of
Right.
social supplies every day. Take in those little bites. Yes, it's not the whole banquet you long for. I get that. But still, it's food. Take in that little bite. And then bite by bite, you will gradually, bit by bit, fill yourself up from the inside out. And over time, you'll build up resources that will help you reach for larger meals more successfully by building up these resources inside. But in addition to that, and then to finish, to what we want to receive, right? So I've spoken so far only on experiencing social supplies from the outside in. And then when you experience them, slow it down for a breath or longer, feel it in your body, focus on what's rewarding about it. Any one of those three will increase the process of lasting brain change bit by bit by bit. And the more of them, the better. And the more often you do it, the better. Okay. So that's about coming in from the outside. But as you know, the world will break your heart.
It does.
Yeah. Lately, I've been really reflecting on the courage to, tell the truth about the ways that many, many people are stunningly irresponsible, unjust, hypocritical, lazy, uh, irresponsible, just stunning, large and small. I mean, we could talk about it politically. I'll just mention the obvious point and then bring it back down to earth. So there are limitations on what we can get from others.
Right.
We're a bit player in the lives of many people. They've got other issues on their plate. Yes, deep down inside them is that inherent goodness in us all. And still in the moment, it's a brush on by. So what do we do? On the other hand, we can always express caring of one kind or another, typically very mild. We can see another person suffering as they walk past us on the street. We can be a little generous in what we do. Deliberately leave a dollar in the tip jar instead of your loose change. Or let the other person go ahead. Or don't interrupt them. That's an amazing form of generosity. Just stop interrupting. Right? Uh, and other things, contribute, like get a puppy, rescue animal,
Right.
or be helpful, or be gracious with a little kid walking past you or being pushed past you in a little stroller. Kind of beam at that little child. Do that for them and do it for you.
Hmm.
Because amazingly, as we express social supplies, as we express caring, and I think of 5 kind of levels of caring, from the lowest to the highest, I'll just name them. Inclusion, that someone's included.
Hmm.
They're even included in your gaze, or there's a sense of we're in this together. Second, being seen, empathized with. We're paying attention to others. Grant them the gift of your attention for more than 10 seconds in a row. which is a huge give for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
How often do we actually sustain attention to another person in ordinary interaction for
Mm-hmm.
10 seconds in a row, let alone 2 minutes in a row? Wow, give them your attention. Amazing. And then third, appreciation, respect. Respect is so important to grant to others, genuine respect, including simply as a fellow human with common humanity on this planet together. Uh, respect for uh, or gratitude, expressing gratitude of various kinds, or acknowledging others, and then liking. That's the fourth form of
Yeah.
caring.
Mm-hmm.
Just being friendly or fond of someone in a healthy way, or affectionate in an appropriate way, or just kind of being like, I like you, right? That's so great to be on the receiving end of that, and it's so great to express it. And then there's of course love. So we have those cherishing, loving, and so forth. So we have including, seeing, appreciating, liking, and loving. Great. So when we express that as well, even if the world is kind of barren, even if the world is pretty unfriendly, kind of spooky, we can't make it love us. We can't make others treat us well, but we can choose appropriately to be compassionate, to be moral, to be generous, to be forgiving, to be patient, to be helpful. We can do those things ourselves. And as we do them ourselves, love is love, whether it's flowing in or flowing out.
Mm-hmm.
As we do those ourselves, we can fill ourselves up. And as we experience those things, we can also internalize and slow down. What does it feel like to have compassion for someone walking past you on the street? Can you stay with that to move from state compassion to trait compassion?
Right.
Can you, what's it feel like to be respectful rather than contemptuous or indifferent to another person? Um, what does it feel like? And then as you stay with it for a breath or longer, you can develop a trait, respectfulness of other people and other kinds of things as well, including developing trait lovingness over time. So for me, that's incredibly hopeful. That's pretty foundational. So I'll shut up right now. I kind of rattled on here. Anyway, but I just think it's great. No one can defeat us. No one can stop us from doing those things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that, and it's so practical. So there's a couple things I want to follow up on. One is the inner critic. So we have trauma; it's stored in that, probably in that second container, and we have shame about our past, or all kinds of things. And the inner critic gets going and has a field day. What do you do? Do you challenge it? Do you tell it to shut up? Do you try and find out why it's doing that? Like what are your suggestions?
I think first it's really helpful to separate the inner critic, which is sort of verbal and critical, and scorn. It has a scorning quality. Okay. Separate that from um, very somatic, typically, and emotional uh, feelings of things like shame or inadequacy, or that, like the bottom dropping out of your gut. Just so the point is, they go together, but they're kind of different. The inner critic is more verbal, it's more cognitive. People tend to address it in more cognitive ways, like they argue against it, they dispute it. There's a lot of cognitive therapy methods about that. There are other tricks you can use with the inner critic, like imagining it as like it's a ridiculous villain in a Disney cartoon film. Just like stupid. Okay, but that's only just a small part of it. A lot of what draws people down into the pit, and which then they try to self-medicate through using one thing or another, is that they have very intense nonverbal sensations in their body, or emotions, or imagery even, that's very deep, that has nothing to do, particularly with this verbal critic. So both are important. I think it's very helpful to distinguish them, though, because people can do um, a lot of talking back at the inner critic and arguing with the inner critic, and maybe over time that inner critic gets slightly quieter. But on the whole, they haven't really addressed the somatic residues. Antonio Damasio coined the term somatic markers of that trauma material, which, as Babette Rothschild put it in the title of her book, The Body Remembers. So both, I want to name that. With regard to the somatic residues, those tend to be addressed by bringing mindful awareness to them. So first we be with it, and then we often will move into a release. We have a feeling of the somatic residues, the feeling in the body, the shame feeling, kind of unpacking and vibrating and disentangling. And then there's like a sense of flow with it. It starts moving, right? Doesn't feel so static. It feels more fluid, more stream-like than stone-like, more like water than a stone. And then, very important, it's to bring in an alternative way of experiencing the body that is matched. There's that matching idea again. That's if you have a flat tire, you need a spare tire. You could put gas in the tank, but it won't address your flat tire. You got to match the medicine to what the illness is in the metaphor. Okay, so what you might do then, if you have a sense of really slumping and deflation, you would bring in alternatives to that, like sitting up straighter, being more visible, seeing what that's like, bringing in a sense of vitality, growing trait vitality by helping yourself do things in which you're more expressive, you're living bigger, I think it's especially important for women, taking up more space, standing taller, larger gestures, being willing to take up more space. That's very important. Or you could have a sense of a kind of soothing. I'm just naming and riffing on multiple ways to antidote, in effect, with matched psychological resources, the somatic residues of shame or trauma or worthlessness. So there could be a sense of a kind of soothing coming in, a sweetness. Like very often these are young layers inside. It could be something very maternal or paternal or just however you imagine it, something very soothing, something very healing, comforting, coming in, literally gradually replacing those somatic markers that are negative, that have a sense of deflation, powerlessness, worthlessness, low mood, with something that feels more energized, more active, more of an agent rather than more of a cause and an effect, more of like a cue ball rather than the eight ball. You can gradually replace that over time. And that's a very deep process. And again, I just kind of summarized right there a year of self-directed therapy. Person can just take what I said right there and start today. 5 minutes a day. I mean, what I just described is less than 5 minutes a day. Maybe do it for an hour with your therapist once a week, but 5 minutes a day or less. Look for those moments to experience in your body kind of matched resources for the residues of trauma, shame, worthlessness, including related to being addicted in your history. And then really look for opportunities in that two-step process of change. Experience what you want to grow, and then slow down to internalize it. Turn that state into a trait by experiencing it for a breath or longer, feeling it in your body, being aware of what's rewarding about it. Any one of those three are good, the more the better. There are other methods as well. I go into great detail in this in my different programs online, like the Foundations of Wellbeing program, etc. But that's the essence of the process. And what I just did, so that's 5 minutes a day or less. Okay, now the critic. You okay? I'll do the critic, right? So, man, arguing with the critic is like trying to convince that asshole at the end of the bar that fill in the blank or Uncle Bob or whatever. Good luck with that. It's a long, slow slog. You can do it over time. But what's much more useful, I think, and within your power to do, is to grow what I call the inner caring committee. In other words, the structure of the psyche classically could be described as inner child, nurturing parent, critical parent. All right. So an updated version is victim, perpetrator, rescuer, protector. A broader way of describing it is beleaguered self, inner nurturer, inner attacker. And for most people, their inner attacker is huge, like Godzilla, and their inner nurturer is tiny, like Bambi. Don't hurt little Ricky, and pretty ineffectual. So yeah, over time we want to disempower the inner critic. We want to withdraw fuel and supplies from it. First and foremost, we don't want to agree with it. We don't want to ally with it. We don't want to be disloyal to our innermost being. Very important. The inner critic starts nattering away. Step back. Instead of agreeing with it, instead of that inner critic's voice being me, that inner critic is over there. I have it, but that does not mean I am it. Right? It's there to try to help me. It's really misguided. It's way over the top. It's over there. I'm over here. Okay, that's important. But beyond that, look for those opportunities to grow your inner nurturer. And I think of the caring committee, which has many members. There's your tough-minded sponsor who just sees it the way it is and looks you in the eye and calls it. But they're not mean. They're on your side. They're your ally. I think about, I've never been in formal recovery, but I have a feeling for this. And I think about coaches I've had or rock climbing guides. Quit whining, Hanson, and start climbing. But they're on your side. They're not horrible about it. They're not the inner critic. They're like, and there's a place for that. There's also a place for encouragement. Like, you can do this. It's okay. I know it hurts. You can bear this pain. You don't need to use to get through the night. You're going to be okay. You've gotten through before. You can do it again. One breath at a time, right? One day at a time. You can hang in there. Like, that's encouragement. There's also a really sweet, tender aspects of the caring committee. Love you, sweetie. I think of the little kind of plump fairy godmother in the Sleeping Beauty films from Disney. Like, yeah, it's okay. I think about your friends. Who's on your caring committee? Your partner, your cat, your guardian angel, spirit beings. Is God with you on your caring committee? Your horse. I have a friend whose horse is definitely on a caring committee. A rescue horse. So anyway, so that's my summary. So we can deal with the inner critic by disidentifying from it, defueling it, not agreeing with it, not feeding it, not following it. As they say in Zen, we don't have to follow that voice. But in addition to that, and we can argue against it and all the rest of that, it's really important to grow the inner caring committee over time. And here too, 5 minutes or less a day. Any opportunity to feel cared about, or to even in your imagination, who's with you? Who are your inner allies? Who are your comrades in this hopefully long and inevitably difficult, if not always difficult, journey through life? Who's with you? And you can grow this caring committee inside every day.
I think it's really important too that you don't have to have necessarily in-person caring committees, that you can do it even in your imagination.
Precisely. And implicit in what you're saying and what I'm saying is this sense of self-reliance and resourcefulness.
Right.
And I want to name something though. Yes, they should have helped.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, they should have not have been such world-class assholes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's all true.
Yeah.
And what are we going to do today? What
Right.
are we going to do this minute, this breath? What are we going to do? Well, they should have helped. They really should have helped. And it's burdensome on me to have to do it for myself.
Mm-hmm.
Dang. And yet, the courage to tell the truth, the courage to see the way it is the courage to recognize, yeah, I am on my own. Sucks. Okay, what can I do?
Right.
What can I do in the next minute? What can I do in this situation? What can I do in the inner temple of my own mind, which I could point to any part of my body? What can I do in my innermost heart to practice with what I'm feeling right now, cope with this situation, and help myself grow in the process?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So your programs that you offer, there's so many. I mean, you've got a wonderful podcast with your son Forrest.
That's
and
a really good thing to do. Yeah.
It's a great thing to listen to. Yeah.
The Being Well. It's called
Being Well.
What it's about. We have all kinds of great people on it.
Yeah. Yeah. And your books, of course. And so you have a new online program, Neurodharma. Can you just, I mean, it's fascinating just looking at your descriptions. It's so holistic and deep. I mean, I could just sense some of the spaciousness in there. But maybe you could talk about that just for a minute. What would people be?
So people can go to my website. It's the easiest way to do it, rickhanson.son.net. I have lots and lots of resources there of many, many kinds. I was laughing with the people who work for me because I drive them crazy sometimes. I'm a librarian at heart in some ways. You know what I mean? In that, I like libraries were a refuge for me as a kid. Just kind of get
Mhm.
out of the war zone of my family and go to that library. The librarian was nice. Here's some good science fiction this week, whatever. He was
Mhm.
quiet, nobody was yelling at me or trying to hit me with,
Right.
like that. Anyway, so I on my website, there's a lot of freely offered material. Additionally, we have this wonderful program called the Foundations of Wellbeing.
Mhm.
It's unique, it's thorough, it's set up to take about an hour a week. You could
Mhm.
do it over the course of the year. You could speed it up or slow it down.
Mhm.
And it has to do with growing 12 strengths inside that are
Ah,
relevant for life in general, as well as certainly these are very, very relevant for addiction and recovery. Strengths like mindfulness, compassion, grit, gratitude, motivation, aspiration, intimacy, things like that. Okay, that's the foundations of well-being. It's
mhm.
foundational. It's
Right.
a thoroughgoing, fundamental foundation of happiness and resilience, the two together. Great. On that foundation, on the foundation of the foundations of well-being, in the last several years, I've developed this material that I call Neurodharma, which for me is a way of saying science, wisdom, and steps to the highest happiness. What actually are the qualities of awakened beings or people who are really far along that we can develop in ourselves, including they are natural to us, they tend to be covered over, and we can uncover them. So, what are these qualities that we develop over time that aim at the absolute heights of human potential? I think in these times, which are full of wonderfulness, they're also full of just a kind of ugliness and despair. I think it's so important to not be defeated and to not be defeated in the form of giving up on a vision of what is realistically possible for us as individuals, and then by extension, increasingly in our community, in our homes, our workplaces, our communities, and the halls of Congress and our countries altogether, the whole world altogether. Do not lose sight of what those possibilities are. So it's in this framework that is aspirational and also focused on practice because we grow them by being them. We take the fruit as the path, as a Tibetan proverb, I think, has it. So I'll just very quickly name what these are. And I have an online program that, in a very real way, goes through, it's based on a hardcore, deep meditation retreat I taught for over 10 days with guided meditations, talks that are really about the upper reaches of human potential, which are so relevant to the trenches of the crud of everyday life. So, briefly, and you can feel, so I'll just name them as practices. Steadying the mind. That's the first of seven. So, you look at people who are really, really far along, and we would think of them as models. They're people, some of them are famous, some of them are known in history. Um, some of them nobody knows about. It's that kindergarten teacher that when she passes away, 300 people go to her memorial in that small town and say she was a living saint. I don't know how she did it. How do they do it? Oh, and I should add that in each one of these seven, I explore plausibly what's the underlying science these days of how, what's the embodied basis of steadiness of mind, the first of the seven. The second is warming the heart. How do you develop compassion and love in the face of injustice and unkindness so that you're not a chump? You're strong, but your heart is not poisoned by hate. How do you develop that over time? Well, what's happening in the body when you're warming your heart, right? Or the third practice I call resting in fullness, coming into a deep feeling in the moment, in the core of your being, of inner peace, contentment, and love as you face the challenges of life. So it's kind of like having a very deep keel in your personal sailboat so that inside yourself, no matter what's going on in your body or out in the world, you feel fundamentally an unshakable core of resilient well-being way down inside that has feelings in it or qualities in it of peacefulness, contentment. There's an enoughness already, which obviously undermines any and all addictions. Contentment, is the circuit breaker for addiction. If you're already contented, you don't use. If you feel already full, you don't reach for the next thing to take in. So how do you develop that sense of fullness? Fullness already, resting in fullness. That's the third practice. So those three go together. They're individually quite profound in meditative ways. If you're inclined, you can develop any one of them very profoundly. Tremendous steadiness of mind takes people into these non-ordinary meditative experiences, samadhis, jhanas, just way out there. Love can be profoundly perfected. Imagine the love of a living saint and then the realistically dialed down version that's accessible to ordinary mortals. And you can also develop profound equanimity, profound inner peace, contentment, and love that's undisturbable. Undisturbable. That's great. But these three are kind of ordinary. Then the next three really go into the deep end of the pool. The fourth is, I call it being wholeness. I spoke of it earlier, getting into a sense of your body as a whole, yourself as a whole, the courage to be yourself out loud now, courage to be yourself now, who you actually are now. And as you do that, you start moving more into a sense of your mind as a whole rather than feeling internally divided. A lot of what drives addiction is feeling internally divided in one way or another. Fifth practice, receiving nowness. Nowness. You come right into the present. How do you actually do that? What's going on in the brain when you be here now? When you tap the power of now? There are really neat things you can do to train, to be right in the present moment. And when you're right in the present moment, there's much less suffering. Suffering is like in the backwash, 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds behind what happened right now. The more you come into the immediacy of the moment, the less suffering. The sixth practice I call opening into allness. That's where you start having a sense of being one with everything. You know that your body's here, that body's there. You know you have to stop at a red light. But more and more, you feel like a local ripple in a sea of causes, right? That you're part of everything. And you feel instead of beleaguered and divided away from everything, attacked by it, instead, you feel supported by everything. You're buoyed. You're protected by everything. That's a wonderful, wonderful experience. And by extension, and I explore this in my material as well, plausibly, what's going on in the brain when people have these very intense, non-ordinary experiences, boom, in which the sense of self drops out and the sense of the universe, the whole world, just shines forth. And then the last practice I call finding timelessness. That's where minimally we find what could be called unconditioned, unfabricated within ourselves, not constructed, not subject to arising and passing away. And for those like me who think there is more than ordinary reality, who believe and experience that there are supernatural and in particular transcendental aspects to ultimate reality, the divine, the ground, the nameless, the unconditioned, as the Buddha talked about it. That last chapter is about, or that last practice, the seventh one, finding timelessness, is about what can we do in our practices to open into what is unconditioned, what is not subject to passing away, and therefore an unreliable source of lasting happiness. How can we uncondition ourselves from the bad habits we've acquired? How can we be aware in ourselves of a field that's unconditioned, that's reliable? It's like a pond that's still. And by extension, if you're into it, how can we open up into the transcendental, a sense of timelessness, peacefulness, consciousness, maybe a love that's beyond ordinary love? What can we actually do? So those are the seven. As you can tell, it's a big swing. I'm going after the ultimate. And along the way, exploring continually, what's the underlying biology of that? Plausibly, what's going on in our brain, and how can we use that information to drop into those ways of being, in our own real life, to develop over time traits of steadiness, lovingness, fullness, wholeness, nowness, allness, and timelessness. That's really cool.
That is really cool. And it's like this perfect blend of your psychology training, your neuroscience understanding, and your deep meditation practice and your own depth.
Yeah, thank you. And you're exactly right. It's a practice for me. I liken it a little bit. So I just finished a book about this that's going to come out in May next
Oh,
year,
good.
and I'm very happy about it. And the sort of um, the felt sense for me of what this is about is having spent a fair amount of time in the mountains. I think about my friends who are maybe farther up the trail. Maybe they're a better climber, maybe they're more fit, they're farther up the trail, and they turn around with a friendly gesture and they go, "Hey, Rick, you can do it. Come on, man, pick
Mm,
it up." Or "Watch out for the ice," or "How you doing, bro?" Whatever. There's an encouragement there. In much the same way, I think if we were to define the heights of human potential, we might people have different view about what's really up there, right? But we all get a sense, yeah, that. Well, there are beings throughout history and in the world today who also are a little further along than us, depending on where we are on that mountain of awakening as a broad process. And I imagine them turning around to say, "Hey, come on up. The
mm,
trail is steep, but the view is magnificent.
right, right.
So clear up here. Leave
Mm,
that dust behind. Come on, you can do it. I did it. I got here myself. I walked up here myself. You can do it as well." So it has that spirit of invitation. And I think of that mountain of awakening in a broader sense. There's the Christian path, there's the Buddhist path, there's the Muslim path, there's the indigenous people paths, many plurals around the world. There are secular paths, okay, fine, like different routes up to the same summit. But as you get closer and closer to the top, a Christian saint seems a lot like a Jewish saint, seems a lot like someone who's done deep secular mindfulness practice. You start converging when you get closer and closer to the top. There are different routes, but on each of those routes, the secular route, the Hindu route, you name it route, you find the same steps again and again, the same practices. They're like steps of different routes up to the mountain of awakening, steps of steadiness, lovingness, fullness, wholeness, nowness, allness, and timelessness. And I find that that's just great. We can do it. You know what I mean? We all have access to these steps, and we can use these fundamental practices of steadiness, lovingness, fullness, and so forth, whatever our route is, up our own personal mountain of
So one last question. I know that we've been talking for an hour, so we could talk probably for three.
awakening.
But
Yeah, I could listen to you, by the way, for an hour, two or three, because you too are a very deep being.
oh, thank you. Yeah, it's such a pleasure to speaking about resonating with people. It's such a pleasure to talk with you.
I
Okay,
know
so your last question. Do you believe that everybody can heal?
100%. I believe it. I know it. I more than believe it. I know it. I feel it in my bones. And absolutely.
I do too.
Yeah.
I think that's is something that people get discouraged sometimes by how long it takes,
Yeah.
and just think, well, maybe that's for her, but it's not for me. And you've had, years of your clinical practice and working with people and meditating and all that you bring to this. And so I asked that question because I want people to be able to look into your eyes and hear you say that.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. And it's like, I know that there's coffee in this cup.
Yeah.
I know that my friend made this cup and gave it to me.
Wow.
I know these things.
Right.
I know more surely than I know there's coffee in this cup that everyone can heal. And I also know that um, the bigger the issue, the more effort we need to make. and the more that we need help from others, and the more that we need to catch a break. You know,
Right.
it's kind of the big three: inner effort, external support, and grace.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some of us don't catch a break, right? And I think that's important to take into account, which in a way makes it easier to take the step each day to heal. Because
Right.
when you acknowledge that some people are less lucky than others, and it's just luck. There's random variation.
Yeah.
Who came to your school when you were in fifth grade or didn't? When your family moved or didn't? Something genetically glitch upstream. What your mom was doing when you were a fetus inside your womb wasn't your fault. It's big
Yeah.
picture. You really get it. Who your government is, whether they're public services for drug addiction, all that stuff.
Right.
Uh, you realize I can't do anything about all that stuff. You know what I mean? And it
Yeah.
kind of lightens you up because you realize that it's just friction to rail against it. There's a place for being outraged. There's a place for moral disgust. There's
Mhm.
a place for clearly recognizing the forces. There's a place for healthy anger. Great. But after whatever's useful about that, anything else is excess baggage. And I
Mhm.
liken it a little bit to if you're jogging at sea level, you can have 20 extra pounds in your backpack. But if you're at 20,000 feet, bringing your friends up the mountain with you, you can't afford that extra crud in your backpack. You've got to lay that stone down. You've got to drop
Mhm.
that baggage. And I think it's helpful to realize, yeah, those forces that hurt me are not good, da 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 da. But carrying grievances, carrying grudges, resentments, and so forth, it's like taking poison and waiting for others to die, as the saying
Mhm.
has it. That's not good for us. So then what we're left with is what we can do ourselves every day. And
Right.
there's tons of science. I don't care how bad it was for you as a premature infant, or I mean, I do care, but what I'm meaning is, in it, no matter how bad it was for you as a premature infant, no matter how bad the genetic deck is stacked against you, no matter how crummy your current circumstances are, research shows and experience tells us that inside the temple of your own innermost being, no one can defeat you. This breath, what you do there, this breath, is
Right.
under your influence. And that's a power that we can all claim. And as we claim that power and use it, we can heal. It
Mhm.
may take a while, but the journey is noble. That's the other side of it. The journey,
Mhm.
rather than being perfectly healed, uh, am I doing the best I can this breath? Am I doing the best I can this minute?
Mhm.
There's a saying, I think in Tibet, I think Alcoholics Anonymous and Tibet have the best sayings, basically.
Okay.
Anyway, there's a saying supposedly from Tibet: if you take care of the minutes, the years will take care of themselves.
Ah, right.
What can I do this minute? And that's where honor is: nobility, dignity, self respect. What can I do this minute? And no one can stop us.
Mhm. Well, thank you so much. It's just been wonderful talking with you, and,
That's great. And I think moxie and scruffy, like I'm a mellow California therapist, but it's like, kind of mellow. And there's no
yeah,
replacement for moxie,
yeah,
for grit and courage and determination and
yeah,
firiness as appropriate. And to bring that as well, bring that to bear.
yeah. Yeah, we need all of that to heal. Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
I was just super honored to do this, and I wish people well. And check out my stuff. We have money back guarantees. It's very affordably priced. With tons of value in it. Check
Mhm.
it out. Um,
It's
and
rickhanson.net is the portal.
yeah,
Yeah,
rickhanson.net. Yeah.
right.
So thank you.
Oh, cool. Well, thank you.
Blessings to you and gratitude to you for what you do. Seriously, you help a ton of people.
Well, thank you. And gratitude to you too. Yeah. And I just found out yesterday, I'm going to do an interview with James Gordon next week. So he sounds like a pretty delightful guy. I know he's just on your podcast.
That's exactly right. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's really special. He's a hero. He's
Yeah.
a super real deal.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. Well, until
Vows,
we meet again.
blessings and vows, blessings and vows.
Yeah, lovely. Okay, bye for now, Rick. Bye. Hello, this is Lynn Fraser with the Kiloby Center Radical Recovery Summit. We are so excited to bring you the lineup for January 10th to 19th, 2020. Go to radicalrecoverysummit.com to see the new headliners for 2020 and to sign up. You can watch free January 10th to 19th or buy an all-access pass.